The Roman limes represents the borderline of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent in the 2nd century AD. The limes stretched over 5,000 kilometers from the Atlantic coast of northern Britain through Europe to the Black Sea, and from there to the Red Sea and across North Africa to the Atlantic coast. The remains of the limes today consist of vestiges of built walls, ditches, forts, fortresses, watchtowers, and civilian settlements. Hadrian's Wall has outstanding universal value in that it fully illustrates the effort of building the limes on the frontiers of the Roman Empire, at the time of its apogee and greatest extension in the British Isles and worldwide. It also embodies a high degree of expertise in the technical mastery of earthen defensive constructions, in the construction of a strategic system of forts and camps, and in the general military organization of the limes. Wall is located in one of the most picturesque settings along the whole of Hadrian's Wall, overlooking the River Irthing Gorge. It is unique because at no other point along the wall are all the components of the Roman frontier system found in such a small area. The early turf wall, built in 122 AD, can still be seen over the original fort. The turf wall, stone wall, Harrow's Scar Mile Castle, a short walk along the wall, and the fort itself are all visible reminders of the Roman occupation. Hadrian's Wall was accompanied by a regularly settled chain of forts, fortlets, and beacon platforms. Civil settlements were developed around the forts, but as yet few details are known about them. There are several temporarily used military camps in groups near the wall. It is assumed that they were used by the auxiliary troops and legion detachments that took part in the construction of the wall. 17 forts are known to have existed along the line of Hadrian's Wall, of which 16 have survived. Some of them were built earlier than the ramparts or at the same time, while others were built at a later date. The forts generally had stone principal buildings with timber barrack blocks and storehouses. The number of ditches varied from 2 to 4. 2 forts had stone walls, the others turf ramparts. Several forts had defended enclosures or annexes, often containing the bathhouse. The north-facing cliffs, with their long, gentle southerly slopes, provided the Roman civil engineers with a natural defensive site for the construction of Hadrian's Wall. The massive, hard, and resistant columnar-jointed dolerite imparts a distinctive character to these outcrops, which contrast strikingly with the generally lower ridges and crags, called cuestas, formed by parallel outcrops of Carboniferous sandstone and limestone. The Great Windsill was formerly worked on a large scale in quarries at Walton and Caulfields. Landscaping of the former site has significantly lessened its visual impact as a man-made feature. Near Carborough Fort stands a fascinating temple to the eastern god Mithras, with reproductions of altars found during excavation. Located like many Mithraic temples near a military base, it was founded in the 3rd century and eventually desecrated, probably by Christians. Mithraea were rectangular stone and timber buildings with wooden roofs. Internally, each had an antechamber, a nave with raised benches along the walls, and a sanctuary with altars and a tauroctony. Some Mithraea are sunk below ground and had no windows, as each Mithraeum was intended to be as dark as the original cave of Mithras. The Roman army first encountered the cult of Mithras in Persia during the reign of the Emperor Nero, although its origins in India have been traced back to 1400 BC. The story of Hadrian's Wall is that of the evolution of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire reached the apogee of its territorial extension in the 2nd century AD. At that time, it extended through Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. The empire's frontiers, or limes, were fortified across more than 5,000 kilometers, using local materials and resources, geographical features, and also the exceptional expertise of the military and civil engineering of Roman civilization. The principle of the Roman limes is based on a linear materialization of the frontier and the presence at regular intervals of forts, fortlets, and watchtowers. It is also based on a system of military ways along the lines of defense, linking the forts and camps, and leading towards the interior of the empire to enable the renewal of troops and the transport of supplies. From the 2nd century BC, Rome began its territorial expansion beyond the Alps, towards Gaul and Germania. Caesar was the first Roman general to cross the English Channel and to stay temporarily in the southeast of present-day England. Several of his successors planned to settle the lands across the English Channel, but did not succeed in their aims. It was the Emperor Claudius who succeeded in conquering Britannia. Though Agricola fought successfully against the Caledonians in Scotland, in 85 AD the offensive was halted, and one legion together with some auxiliary forces were ordered to the Danube. After the troops were withdrawn, the boundary was fixed in the line of the road called Staingate. Despite repeated offenses, Rome did not succeed in occupying the northern part of Britain. Hadrian had the first massive wall built as the limes, the most impressive Roman defense line ever built. The two sections of the limes constitute the northwesternmost portion of the Roman limes. The 118-kilometer-long stretch known as Hadrian's Wall was built on the orders of the Emperor Hadrian, beginning in around 122 AD, at the northernmost limits of the Roman province of Britannia. The Antonine Wall, a 60-kilometer-long fortification in Scotland, was begun by Emperor Antoninus Pius in 142 AD as a defense against the barbarians of the north. The Antonine Wall was the last built linear barrier of the Roman Empire. After its abandonment, Roman troops only continued to occupy certain posts north of Hadrian's Wall, but none on the Antonine Wall. The last effort to reoccupy the region was made by Septimius Severus, but as he died during the campaign, this aim was given up forever. The empire lost its strength in the middle of the 3rd century, but then became stronger again, and survived until the second half of the 5th century AD. Over its history, after its abandonment by the Roman troops in the late 160s AD, the wall quickly fell victim to natural deterioration, beginning with the many wooden parts. The forts built of masonry were used as sources of stone by local populations. Hedden on the Wall is a village in Northumberland, located on Hadrian's Wall about 14 kilometers from the centre of Newcastle upon Tyne. It contains the longest section of unbroken wall at its original and planned width, now known as Broadwall. The wall is up to 3 meters wide and rises to a height of 1.7 meters in places. The structure of the wall consisted of a turf rampart some 3 to 4 meters high, with a ditch along its north front. Earth from the ditch was piled up on the outer side and formed to an outer mold. The Antonine Wall was placed on a stone base, probably intended to be about 15 Roman feet, or 4.4 meters, wide. Evidence of repairs to the wall has been found in several places. Lanercost Priory was originally founded by Henry II in the 12th century as an Augustinian monastery. Standing close to Hadrian's Wall in the borderlands, the Lanercost Priory has suffered more frequent attacks than many of its contemporaries. Constant warring between the Scots and English, along with regular skirmishes from the border rivers, left the building battle-scarred and ruined. Robert Bruce himself once laid siege to Lanercost Priory. The parish church dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene now hosts regular Anglican services, as it has done for 850 years. Lanercost Priory is considered to be the best preserved monastery in Cumbria, with the east end of the noble 13th century church surviving to its full height. The building is now owned by English Heritage, which continues conservation and preservation works. The Poultice Burn is a tributary of the River Irthing, which rises on Denton Fell and flows northeast, joining the Irthing at Gilsland. The Mile Castle stands on the south bank, and a watermill within the village used the burn's water to grind corn throughout the 19th century. Along the wall at intervals of 1 Roman mile, or roughly 1.5 kilometers, a series of small fortlets were built to house the troops that were assigned the duty of patrolling that particular stretch of wall, and in most cases, to serve as gateways for local traffic. The stone versions measured about 15 by 18 meters, while the turf ones were somewhat larger. Each mile castle contained 1 or 2 stone or timber barracks, the number and size depending on the strength of the unit manning them, which could range anywhere from about 15 to 35 dozen men. There was also an oven, usually in the northwest corner, and a staircase to give access to the ramparts. It is assumed that there was a tower above the gate, but since none of them have survived higher than a few courses of masonry, it is impossible to prove. All of the mile castles were rectangular in shape, with rounded corners. Some of them have their long axis running away from the wall, while others run parallel to it, reflecting the preferences of different legions involved in the work. This probably also accounts for the slight differences in the construction of the gates, varying from 1 or 2 sets of doors in each gate. The earthen gorge starts with the Crammelin waterfall, where the water has cut through the Scottish calciferous sandstone to give a 10-meter drop. The sides of the gorge are steep and were originally covered with yew and later by ash and birch trees. Vindolanda is a fascinating Roman fort and civilian settlement lying just to the south of Hadrian's Wall. It was first garrisoned in the earliest phase of the establishment of Roman Britain's northern frontier, in the decades immediately preceding the building of Hadrian's Wall. It was one node in a network of garrisons and roads across northern Britain. The Roman army appears to have occupied the site of Vindolanda around 85 AD, after the governor, Agricola, had brought the northern tribes to bay at the Battle of Mons Graupius. The fort guarded the central section of the vital east-to-west supply route, now known as the Stane Gate. And when the wall was built some 40 years later, Vindolanda took its place between housesteads and great chesters as a wall fort. Fabulous full-scale replicas bring home the reality of Roman and early British life. There's the wall itself in turf, timber and stone, the Roman temple, the Roman shop, the Romano-British house, and the Northumbrian croft. Visitors can see the remains of the fort with barracks, bathhouses, and mysterious circular buildings, and the civilian settlement complete with High Street together with the impressive reconstructions. The Vindolanda Archaeological Research Program runs for approximately 6 months each year, and depending on the size of the area under excavation, accepts around 300 to 400 volunteers every year. Some are students of archaeology or classics, but many are interested individuals from all walks of life who want to participate in this unique experience. Most of the Antonine Wall is an earthwork. About 35 kilometers of the wall's total length of 60 kilometers consist of scheduled monuments on farmlands. Following the Roman retreat from Scotland, Vindolanda sat on the outer rim of a network of auxiliary garrisons that extended across the whole of northern England, with the legions stationed to the rear at York and Chester. The roads built to support the military advance through northern Britain were also critical to communication between garrisons and the control of conquered territory, as well as being a reminder in the landscape of Roman domination. Vindolanda itself lies on the Stane Gate, built by Agricola or his successors, connecting Corbridge to Carlisle through the gap in the Pennine Hills, cut by the rivers Tyne and Irthing. The name of the road is medieval, but the route is Roman. The Stane Gate perhaps marked the limit of Roman control, but may have been a patrolled road rather than a formal frontier line, allowing the movements of the Britons to be monitored. The milestones set up along the Steingate and other roads by 3rd and 4th century emperors, presumably to record repairs, show the continuing importance to the army of these strategic routes. The site lies on a plateau, open to the west but bounded on the remaining 3 sides by steep banks falling to burns that flow south towards the Tyne. Thus defended, and with an abundant water supply, it was suitable for establishing a fort. Vindolanda also lay about 27 kilometers, or a day's march, from Corbridge along the Steingate, with a suitable stopping-off point for soldiers on the move. The first timber fort only occupied perhaps half the site, but the subsequent timber forts extended across the whole of the area, now covered by the stone fort and vicus. The principal late 20th century excavations of the timber forts have identified the western ditch of the very first forts and parts of the central buildings and defenses of the later timber forts. Further excavation is required to confirm the layout and extent of the site in this period, which continues to offer surprises. In 2000 and 2001, 2 new buildings were identified that date to this phase, a bathhouse south of the fort and a temple to the west, both on display. Records of vegetation preserved in ancient pollen sequences, plow marks beneath Hadrian's Wall, and the existence of many settlements show that much of the frontier area was being farmed before the arrival of the Romans. Pollen from Vindolanda itself suggests that its surroundings included wet meadow, areas used for pasture, and heathland. Tree cover was limited, with alder predominating. There is currently no sign of pre-Roman occupation, although any evidence will lie deeply stratified below the stone fort. The name Vindolanda might mean white or shining enclosure in a Celtic language. The place could have been so named by the local population or by the garrison, partly recruited from a Celtic-speaking area. The first fort at Vindolanda was probably in the same location as the later stone forts. Excavation identified its western ditch, 4.5 meters wide and up to 1.5 meters deep. To the east, north, and south, the maximum limits of the fort are determined by the lie of the land. Its size, at most just under 2 hectares, is believed to be similar to the later stone forts. The fort is likely to have been established during the withdrawal from northern Scotland, after the high point of Roman military expansion in the 80s AD. But the starting date of occupation cannot be precisely established. Very few tablets were excavated from Period 1 deposits. Due to the slumping of later buildings into this ditch through subsidence, even these tablets may date to later periods. The forts were often initially defended with a turf and timber rampart. On sites occupied for longer periods, the defenses were rebuilt in stone, especially from the end of the 1st century AD onwards. In front was a ditch or ditches, and between the rampart and ditch a flat area or berm, protected against the rampart's slumping into the ditch. Roads into the fort crossed ditches over causeways or bridges. There was often one gate in each side, one to the rear, called the Porta Decumana, and one at the front, the Porta Praetoria. The fort was built by soldiers themselves and housed a military community that was in many respects self-contained. Its granary stored sufficient supplies to feed the garrison for many months. From clay and stone for its fabric to grazing for pigs and cattle, the fort drew heavily on its immediate environs. The facilities and skills existed within the garrison to meet a large proportion of its own needs, including food production and the making and repairing of many types of items. The variety of buildings, for example bathhouse, hospital, and temple, would otherwise be found only in larger urban communities. But the fort was by no means totally self-sufficient and depended on constant contact with the outside world. Supplies were regularly on the move to Vindolanda. Nor did the soldiers remain in camp waiting for the Britons to attack. Control of the frontier landscape was based on movement, patrol, and communication. The World Heritage Site also extends into 2 national parks, the Lake District and Northumberland National Parks, the highest landscape designation in the United Kingdom. As well as conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the landscapes, wildlife, and cultural heritage, the national parks must also promote opportunities so that the public can enjoy and understand their special qualities. Agriculture and forestry cover most of the World Heritage Site. In the central sector, farming is primarily pastoral, as it is in parts of Cumbria where dairy farming is an important sector of the industry. Initially, it is believed that the wall from Willowford westwards was built of turf. Hadrian ordered it to be rebuilt in stone in 122 AD, and it stood firm for around 300 years until the fall of Rome. After that, it fell into ruin, helped by looters taking the dressed stone to build farms and houses. Over time, the wall collapsed into more of a mound that was slowly covered with earth and vegetation. Nearly 1,600 years later, the mound at Willowford Farm was excavated to reveal one of the longest unbroken stretches of Hadrian's Wall remaining, which at places still stands almost 2.5 meters high and includes the remains of 2 turrets. Generally speaking, the turrets, all of which were made out of stone, are very much smaller than the mile castles. They were about 6 meters square and were set about 2 meters into the thickness of the wall. There were no proper accommodations, only a staircase leading to the ramparts. Walton Craigs is perhaps the most scenic place to view Hadrian's Wall. The wall twists and winds its way along the slopes of Windsill, creating a dramatic view at every turn. The countryside is superb, and the wall well preserved for much of this area. The wall at this point still stands to a considerable height, and snakes dramatically along the natural rocky defenses of the Windsill. Included along the Walton stretch of the wall are 2 mile castles and 2 turrets. The best preserved section here stands to a height of 2.2 meters. The Roman limes can be fairly compared with the only other large border protection structure, the Great Wall of China. It is different, though, in its characteristics, elements, and even all its functions. The Roman limes was not only a military structure, it also served to regulate trade and the movement of people. The 2 monumental works belong to 2 different great civilizations, historic periods, and parts of the world. Therefore, while they can be considered as of the same architectural category, they have completely different characteristics. The first limes with a road and a row of beacon towers was built under the Emperor Domitian in Scotland, and the palisade or wall was built under Hadrian in Britannia and Germania. Although there are some built wall sections in both Dacia and Africa, the only complete line of a fortified frontier under Antoninus Pius was constructed in Scotland. It is the latest Roman example of a mathematically planned and created frontier line. The limes Wall is said to be the most complex of all Roman frontiers because its forts were closer to each other than on any other frontier. They vary considerably in size. Many, perhaps most of them, had an annex attached to one side. Such annexes were also known from the German frontier built under Antoninus Pius, but not in such a high percentage. A special feature of the wall is the existence of expansions and small enclosures, beacon platforms, attached to the wall. Within sight of the wall is a reclaimed quarry, now a national park recreation site with lake, easy access paths, pond, and marked trails. Hadrian's Wall exerted great influence on the spatial organization of the British limes over approximately 300 years. This military zone bears exceptional testimony to Roman colonization by a large number of human settlements associated with the defenses. Hadrian's Wall is an outstanding example of a fortified limes. No other ensemble from the Roman Empire illustrates as ambitious and coherent a system of defensive constructions perfected by engineers over the course of several generations. whether with respect to military architectural construction techniques, strategic design in the imperial period, or a policy for ground use and the organization of space in the frontier zone. This cultural property is an exceptional reference whose universal value leaves no doubt. Hadrian's Wall is of significant value in terms of its rarity, scale, preservation, and historical and archaeological value. The engineering and planning skills of its builders, the understanding of Roman frontier policy and management, and its influence on the landscape and history of local peoples during the Roman period and beyond, as well as in terms of its contribution to the economic, educational, and social values of today's society.